They say combat teaches you who you are. But sometimes, it's the quiet moments, the ones that look nothing like war, that tell you everything you need to know about the people beside you. I was 29 years old and 6 months into my first deployment when a man poured a can of Coke over my head in front of 30 soldiers. His name was Captain Kyle Mercer, and he thought it was funny. Thought it made him look strong. In control. What he didn't know was that my last name wasn't just mine. It was my mother's. And she was coming to that base in 72 hours, and she wore stars on her collar. But let's back up. It was July. FOB they're on, southern Iraq. The kind of heat that bakes the skin off your face, Bio 700. I was a logistics officer, 1st Lieutenant Zoe Carr, 10th Sustainment Brigade. My job wasn't flashy, but it kept people alive. Convoys, fuel, rations, parts, medical drops, you name it. I made sure it moved. On time. Intact. I had 22 soldiers under me and a motor pool that ran hotter than the surface of the sun. That morning, I was checking the maintenance logs on a fleet of MRAPs when Mercer strolled in like he owned the place. XO of Charlie Company, from the infantry battalion posted next door. A tall guy, loud voice, smug grin. The kind of officer who treats captains like kings and lieutenants like interns. Especially female ones. He walked right up to me in front of everyone, made some lazy joke about supply officers never seeing the field, and then, without warning, grabbed a can from a cooler, popped it open, shook it, and dumped the entire thing over my head. There, he said. You look like you needed a shower, sweetheart. I didn't flinch, didn't shout, just stood there, sticky soda, soaking into my uniform, dripping off my nose. Half the soldiers didn't know where to look. A few chuckled awkwardly. 1 or 2 stared at their boots. I picked up the clipboard I'd been using, noted a missed oil filter change on one of the trucks, keyed the mic on my radio, and reassigned the crew. Then I walked away. Back to my office. Back to the quiet. But something had shifted. He thought it was a joke. I knew it was war. I didn't cry. I didn't slam doors. I just sat at my desk and stared at the wall. The cold, sticky feeling of syrupy soda crawled under my collar, but I didn't move. Not yet. My hands were clenched so tight my fingertips had gone numb. My mother always told me this would happen. Rear Admiral Elise Carr had made lieutenant before I was born. She taught me how to lace boots and how to break down an M4 by the time I was 15. She also taught me this. When someone tries to humiliate you, don't give them your voice. Keep your eyes open, your chin level, and your hands steady. You'll speak later, with facts, not fury. That lesson rang louder in my ears than the echo of Mercer's laugh. He didn't know who I was. Or maybe he didn't care. Either way, it didn't change what needed to happen next. I pulled up a blank incident report and started typing. I listed every detail. The date, the time, the unit, the number of witnesses. I quoted him exactly. I listed 5 soldiers by name who saw it all, 2 from my unit, 3 from his. I didn't editorialize. I didn't threaten. I just reported misconduct. Because this wasn't about pride. It was about leadership. And the truth is, Mercer didn't just pour soda on my head. He poured it over the credibility of every officer watching. He made it okay to mock someone publicly just because he wore more bars. And if I let that stand, then I wasn't leading, I was surviving. And that was never why I joined. The next morning, I handed the report to my CO, Lieutenant Colonel Mahoney. He read it slowly, looked up, and nodded once. "Thank you, Lieutenant," he said. "I'll take care of it." He meant it. Mahoney was the kind of commander who didn't tolerate showboating or hazing. He knew the cost of bad culture in the field. He also knew something Mercer didn't. The Admiral was landing here in less than 48 hours. And she wasn't just here for photo ops. She was here for a full command climate inspection. And I was her daughter. By mid-morning, the rumors had already started. Word traveled fast on a base like they're on. Something about a formal complaint. Something about a captain being named. Something about an XO who crossed a line and the quiet lieutenant who didn't yell, but wrote. Mercer hadn't said anything yet, but I saw the way he glanced my way during chow. Like he wasn't sure if I was bluffing or just waiting to strike. Either way, he stopped laughing. I didn't say a word to anyone. Not to the sergeants, not to the convoy teams, not even to my roommate. I just kept doing my job. Checked tire pressure logs. Scheduled the fuel drop. Logged inventory. But I could feel something in the air had changed. Respect is like ceramic. Once cracked, it's never the same. And Mercer had cracked his own. What Mercer, and most of the battalion, didn't know was that Rear Admiral Elise Carr wasn't just doing a drive-by inspection. She was running a full operational audit on field leadership behavior across several forward bases in the sector. She was also the senior mentor on the Navy's Joint Integrity Board, which meant every word I had typed on that report could trigger a deeper review if someone up the chain saw fit. Lieutenant Colonel Mahoney forwarded my report up the brigade ladder. He didn't mention my last name's significance. Didn't need to. The report stood on merit. But someone up the chain must have connected the dots. By the following morning, Mercer was pulled into a closed-door meeting with his own CO. That CO, Colonel Richardson, had a reputation for protecting his boys. I expected him to try to bury it. But Richardson did something worse. He called it a misunderstanding. Said it was harmless horseplay. No intent to humiliate. Said young officers needed thicker skin in war zones. Then he recommended informal counseling and closed the matter. That's what he wrote. Closed. But I knew better. You don't close a case when the Admiral's plane is touching down in less than 24 hours. Rear Admiral Elise Carr arrived on FOB thereon at 0930 hours, with a small team and zero fanfare. No flags, no speeches, just boots on gravel and clipboards in hand. She wore her usual no-nonsense face, the one that could silence a briefing room with a single glance. I hadn't seen her in nearly 8 months. She didn't ask for me, didn't even look my way. Good. That's how we'd agreed to handle this deployment. At 1000, she began her assessment, top-down review of logistics, command climate, and leadership cohesion. She met with battalion staff, sat in on operations sinks, walked the motor pool, asked questions that pierced like scalpels. And then, just after lunch, she asked to be briefed on junior officer performance across all units, specifically logistics integration, maintenance tracking, and inter-unit coordination. Lieutenant Colonel Mahoney requested I deliver the brief. I walked into the operations tent and stood at the head of the table, charts and numbers ready. My mother sat near the center, flanked by officers who didn't know who she was to me. She didn't blink, didn't smile, just nodded once and said, "Proceed, Lieutenant." And I did. I briefed her like I would any other flag officer, professional, focused, direct. She asked questions. I answered with data. She challenged a resupply timeline. I showed her the manifest and convoy log. She asked about inter-battalion coordination, and I explained how delays were often caused by poor cross-unit accountability, careful, neutral wording. She gave no indication she knew me. That wasn't the point. But the second I finished, and the tent cleared, she remained seated. Just her and Mahoney. 10 minutes later, Mercer's name came up, and everything changed. I was in the comms trailer updating a convoy log when the knock came. One of Mahoney's aides told me I was requested in the conference room. Not ordered, requested. But when an admiral asks, you go. The room was empty except for her. She stood with her back to the whiteboard, arms folded, eyes scanning a personnel roster she already knew by heart. I stepped in, saluted. She didn't return it right away. Just looked at me. Sit. I sat. For a long moment, she said nothing. Just studied me. The silence had weight to it, the kind that makes your spine straighten. Then she said quietly, "You did it right." I didn't reply. "You documented the behavior. Went through your CO, didn't retaliate. Didn't make it personal. That takes restraint." "It was about professionalism," I said, my voice steady. "Not payback." She nodded once. "I know. That's why I'm going to handle it professionally." She picked up the incident report, the one I'd submitted 2 days earlier, and placed it next to a separate folder with Mercer's name printed in bold letters. It was thicker than I expected. "There's a history," she said. "Other complaints. Nothing formally filed until now. But this makes it real. And actionable." I swallowed hard. "Will Colonel Richardson back him up?" She arched a brow. "Colonel Richardson's command integrity is part of my review now. I imagine he's starting to realize that." The door opened. Mahoney stepped in, followed by a base legal officer. "We're moving forward," she said. "There will be a formal inquiry. Captain Mercer will be suspended pending investigation. And the report, your report, will not disappear." She looked at me then, not as an admiral, not even as a mother, just as someone who'd seen too many good officers silenced. "You did your job. You led. Now let us do ours." I nodded, saluted again. This time, she returned it. I walked out of that room with my back straight and my hands no longer clenched, because silence had done its work. And now, The uniform would speak. The next morning, Captain Mercer was pulled from duty. It didn't come with sirens or handcuffs, just a quietly posted command directive and a reassignment to base quarters, pending the outcome of an official investigation. His name was scrubbed from the day's operations board. His call sign dropped from the logistics coordination net. The whispers spread like wildfire, not just about the incident, but about the name. My name. Someone from his company finally connected the dots. A whispered, "Wait, Carr?" Like Admiral Carr? Floated around the chow tent and stuck. I didn't confirm it. Didn't deny it either. I didn't need to. Mercer didn't make eye contact with anyone that day. And I heard later that Colonel Richardson had been summoned to meet with the Admiral personally, twice. Word was, his tone shifted considerably after that. Some officers began pulling me aside quietly. "For what it's worth, that never should have happened," one said. Another nodded respectfully during a pre-convoy brief and called me ma'am, with a different kind of emphasis than before. But the ones that mattered, the soldiers in my platoon, they didn't say much. They didn't have to. They'd seen the whole thing. Seen me take the hit and not flinch. Seen me write the report, show up on time the next day, and keep running missions like nothing had changed. Only something had. There was a new stillness when I gave orders. A quiet that wasn't about fear, it was about trust. I hadn't demanded respect. I'd earned it back the hard way. By not stooping. By not shouting. By standing, soaked in soda, and choosing discipline over drama. And that choice? That's what stayed with them. Not the name. Not the stars. Just the example. The inquiry moved faster than I expected. Witness statements were collected. 2 of Mercer's own soldiers backed my account word for word. A third mentioned he'd seen him mess with junior officers before. Nothing big, he'd said. Just jokes. Just moments. But now, those moments had weight. The JAG officer assigned to the investigation cross-referenced prior informal comments lodged against Mercer. Some offhand remarks from female lieutenants in other units. Comments about tone and boundary issues. None had been elevated until now. The pattern was undeniable. This wasn't a one-time joke. It was a symptom. Within a week, the recommendation came down. General Officer Memorandum of Reprimand. Permanent file. Career limiting, they called it. Mercer was reassigned to a rear echelon staff billet at Division HQ, out of the field, out of a command path. He wouldn't be promoted again. Everyone knew it. He didn't look at me when he left the base. Packed his things into a convoy headed north and vanished without ceremony. I didn't smile. Didn't gloat. This wasn't a victory. It was a correction. The day after his departure, Admiral Carr wrapped up her inspection and left without a word to me. No family dinner. No hallway nod. Just a departing hello and the usual salute exchanged like we were any other officer pair. But that night, I found a note tucked into the back of my operations folder. 6 words, handwritten on plain stationery. Discipline is the long game. Always. I sat in the dark for a while after reading it, not thinking about Mercer, or the reprimand, or the paperwork that made it happen. I was thinking about my soldiers, the ones still out there on convoys, trusting I'd lead from the front. And I thought about how easy it would have been to do the wrong thing in the name of being right. I was glad I didn't. I was glad I learned early, some battles are won in silence. After Mercer was gone, things didn't become easier. They just became clearer. The motor pool still broke down. Convoys still got hit with dust storms or supply snags. Comms still failed at the worst possible moments. But my team? They moved like they trusted me now. Like I'd earned something back I hadn't even realized I'd lost. We started hitting our resupply marks faster than any other platoon on base. When the brigade XO visited our line, he said our turnaround times were suspiciously efficient. I just smiled and handed him the maintenance logs. Every box checked. Every route charted. Some soldiers in Mercer's old company even started asking if they could cross-train with us. Said we ran tight. I said sure. They learned fast that logistics isn't just fuel and crates. It's lifelines and trust. One morning, Sergeant O'Hara pulled me aside. He was one of my oldest NCOs, the kind who never offered praise unless it bled truth. "Ma'am," he said, adjusting his helmet strap. "I've seen officers get loud, get mean, get even. But I've never seen one stay calm and let the system do the bleeding." I didn't know what to say, so I nodded. "It mattered," he added. "The way you handled it. The rest of the platoon saw it. Hell, the whole damn FOB saw it." That stuck with me, because it wasn't about revenge. It was about restoring balance. One person misusing rank can rot a whole structure from within. But one person using theirs with discipline, that can hold the line, that can rebuild trust, that can teach a whole base that professionalism isn't weakness. It's the strongest thing you can wear. When our deployment ended, I rotated back stateside with a chest full of dust and a mind full of silence. No one gave me an award. There was no ceremony. No handshake from a general with cameras clicking. Just a flight out of Kuwait and a seat by the window, watching the world tilt away from the desert I'd called home for a year. And honestly, I didn't need a medal. What I carried with me was sharper. A story that didn't need embellishment. A moment where I could have snapped, but didn't. A uniform I wore with clarity, not anger. I left the Army 2 years later as a captain. Took a job consulting for disaster relief agencies, building supply chain systems in crisis zones. The work felt familiar, complex logistics, high stakes, lives on the line, but no one ever poured a soda on my head again. Sometimes, I'd still run into soldiers I'd served with. They never brought up Mercer. They brought up how we moved, how the convoy teams felt like families, how we didn't cut corners, even when it was easier. But every once in a while, someone would say, "You were the lieutenant from that Coke story, right?" And I'd nod. Not because I wanted to be remembered for that moment, but because they had remembered the right part. That I stood still, that I didn't fight loud, that I trusted the truth would carry. One of my old NCOs once said, "There's a kind of leadership that doesn't need a stage. It walks through fire, then leaves the boots by the door." I kept those boots. Still do. They remind me that legacy isn't built in combat. It's built in conduct. Years later, I found myself speaking at a leadership seminar for young officers. It wasn't something I volunteered for. Someone from my old unit had recommended me. I stood at the podium, looking out at fresh uniforms, clean boots, and wide eyes full of ambition. I didn't tell them about supply chains or convoy manifests. I didn't walk them through motor pool efficiency metrics. I told them one story, about a can of soda, about how it hit harder than any bullet I ever dodged, about how humiliation can feel like a weapon, and how your response to it can define your career more than any battlefield will. I told them what my mother taught me, that discipline is power, that silence is strategy, and that respect is not something you demand, it's something you protect. Afterward, a young lieutenant approached me, said she'd been struggling to lead a team that didn't seem to take her seriously. Asked me what she should do. I told her, lead anyway. Show up. Know your job better than anyone else. Make yourself impossible to dismiss. Then I added, and when someone tries to reduce you to a punchline, don't flinch. Don't fight with noise. Fight with the one thing no one can ignore, character. She smiled, and I saw the steel in her shoulders shift. She understood. As I walked out into the night, I looked up and thought about the Admiral, not as my mother, but as the officer who showed me the long game. Mercer's name faded from rosters. His career dimmed until it vanished. But the story? The story moved. Quietly. Confidently. A reminder passed between barracks and briefings, between female officers in dusty tents and male NCOs who'd learned what integrity looks like under pressure. The punchline didn't win. The standard did. Thank you for watching. Have a great day.